It's time for Talking Pictures Trivia! A quick friendly reminder, running the dishwasher and charging your cell phone count as chores in a pinch.
Welcome to Talking Pictures Trivia, the podcast in which a group of geographically challenged friends explore movies through trivia as an excuse to keep their friendships alive. I'm one of these friends and today's host, Nick, and with me is...
Tom.
And KJ.
Great to have you back as always. Additionally, joining us as a guest for this episode is...
Ryan.
Thanks for joining us, Ryan. Ryan is KJ's cousin and works in the film industry, helping to release independent films including the upcoming Belly of the Beast and Beating Superbugs. You may remember Ryan from our Time Crimes episode, and Ryan has her own show that you should check out called Socially Isolated, which explores what people are doing during the pandemic in the Pacific Northwest. Ryan still conveniently likes movies. For those joining us for the first time, we start off each episode with a movie quiz, as these pivotal questions will determine who earns today's trivia crown. Then, once the fierce competition is over, we follow up with our famous movie rant where anything goes. KJ, tell us about today's movie.
Today, we are going back to 2006 in Japan. Pitapa contactless fare card is introduced in the Kansai region, the Bank of Japan abolishes the zero interest rate policy, and the Nintendo Wii is released. During all this, Tetsuya Nakashima releases his movie, Memories of Matsuko. Tetsuya Nakashima is also known for Kamikaze Girls, Confessions, and World of Kaneko. Other big movies in Japan in 2006 include a disaster movie called Nihon Chinbotsu, an action drama called Limit of Love, and a Studio Ghibli movie called Tales of Earthsea. In Memories of Matsuko, we follow Matsuko's nephew Sho, who is tasked with cleaning out Matsuko's apartment after she's been murdered. The movie tells the life of Matsuko as Sho is learning about his aunt. The story is told in a Big Fish style, where we are getting these hyper-realistic stories of Matsuko's life. This is the movie that sent me on a quest to find more international films. While living in Japan, my wife was part of a group that reached out to Gaikokujin, or foreigners living in Japan, and that group held a movie night featuring Memories of Matsuko. I had never seen anything like this before, and I'm hoping we get a chance today to talk about media that has changed what we thought a particular medium could be. Nick, if you only had one word to describe Memories of Matsuko, what would it be?
Dense. Tom?
Excess. Ryan.
Technicolor.
And my word would be exhausting. It's time for question 1. Name one song you can remember from the movie.
Locked in.
Locked in.
Locked in.
All right. Tom, what do you have?
Love is life.
Nick, what do you have?
Happy Wednesday.
And Ryan, what do you have?
Man, I am impressed. I don't remember any of them specifically except for the hip hop number during prison.
Points for everybody. Tom, you got the prison song. Ryan, you got the prison song. And Nick, you got one of my favorite songs, the Happy Wednesday one. So how'd you guys feel about the music? Would you call this a musical? Did it fit the movie? Should it not have been in the movie?
So I'll say the music and the use of music in it reminded me a little bit of one of my favorite movie musicals, this film, Pennies from Heaven from 1981, which uses music in order to create a kind of alienation effect and create some sort of social commentary by using the genre of the Great American Musical itself. I don't think this movie is quite doing that, but it's not doing the standard romantic musical numbers either. There is something about the genre of the American film or romantic film generally that is being sublimated by the musical numbers, that they end up becoming sort of commentary on themselves. And so I think, you see that with the Happy Wednesday song, which is about delirium, or the delirium that makes her unable to see what's really going on, the reality she's in. And as these songs progress until about the last 40 minutes of the film, the kind of fantastical and therefore delusional atmosphere she places herself in becomes more and more extensive until she's actually seeing, is it Ryu, the really final boyfriend? She sees his head floating in the moon. And I think that the musicals are there to, the musical numbers are there to help us enter that kind of state of delirium. But they're very oddly also commenting on the genre themselves. And I don't think it's musicals, a musical genre. I think it's more of like the great epic picture. I think that's more of what they're commenting on. My example of this would be the lettering in the beginning, in the opening credits, is the exact same lettering used for the Gone with the Wind opening credits. That kind of, grand do 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 do, and the that type of thing. So I think that's what's going on in the picture.
I would say that this isn't a typical musical because I'm in general not a big fan of musicals. They just don't call out to me. But what I will say is I was drawn to some of the songs in this movie because unlike traditional musicals where it's the main characters dancing through the plot, I almost felt maybe not all, but most of the musicals were almost cutaways to give us other information or make something more dramatic to what's going on in her mind or the characters' minds versus playing out the plot in song. Plus, for me, some of these songs were just out there, crazy, and you're going along and you're being pulled in different directions, and all of a sudden you get pulled right into a certain song that you didn't even see coming. I mean, Happy Wednesday is a perfect example of that. So that's why I don't think it's a typical musical because I'm usually not drawn to those. And I actually didn't dislike most of the songs, which kind of caught me off guard as I was watching this film.
I also really like the Bend and Stretch, Reach for the Stars song that kind of happens over and over and over again. For some reason, that felt like it tied some of the movie together. Whereas the movie felt tied together, even though it could have felt very disjointed because you have a lot of different segments. But I felt like that was a good beat throughout the whole movie.
I'm not sure where further dialogue will go on this, but that's why my word was dense because it's already a 2 hours and 10 minutes runtime, and there's a lot of story packed within that. So it's not like you had a small movie that had a lot of story packed in. You had a long movie that had a lot of story packed into it.
Well, I'll say that I was glad to hear Thomas sort of referenced what I was getting at with my word, which was Technicolor. So it seems like you picked up a lot on that. There was sort of this epicness of, and the brightness of the colors and the length that sort of harkens back to, but also the other thing I would say is that we're sort of familiar with the American epics like Gone with the Wind and we can, so when there's like a modern take on those and I'm blocking the name of, there was a Juliette Moore movie where she was a lot like a Douglas Sirk, kind of a callback to that. And we could all recognize that that was the style that it was playing on with these melodramas. But I feel like I don't know enough about Japanese filmmaking traditions to see if this was a commentary on one of those. So maybe if you guys know, maybe you could jump in and tell me some more about what this tradition might be doing a call back to.
That was also my confusion. Was the idea with Pennies from Heaven, and the what's called a Brechtian musical, that's just the genre, is that it becomes a sort of social commentary. And so with the Brechtian musical, it's about kind of economic depression, blah blah, comment on capitalism, etc. And that's pretty obvious in it. And Brechtian musicals tend to see the theme there. This doesn't seem to really be taking aim at those kind of George Stevens giant type pictures. It really seems to love them, but at the same time, that becomes the vehicle by which we see she is delusional, right? The grand scale, because we're given in the beginning two introductions. We're given the kind of hard and fast introduction where we meet her nephew and he breaks up with his girlfriend, and it's very modern, and then a second introduction in which we meet her, and that's the Gone with the Wind George Stevens Giants introduction. And the movie seems to both use that as a means to really love this woman, who goes through these horrible things, but at the same time I don't understand fully what it's doing there.
Yeah, and Ryan, I'm not familiar with too many other Japanese films that this might be calling back to. But if any of our listeners want to reach out to us on Twitter, if they're familiar with any, I'd love to dive in and see, maybe what this is referencing. I think you're spot on, Tom, with Gone with the Wind and those kind of epics. Um, and I also agree that whenever it does cut to a song, it's not a musical in that like the song's not in universe, right? This is an outside kind of what Nick was saying. And I think that's a pretty interesting way to tell a story, right? It's almost what's going on in her mind. Like we get a better understanding of her through these fantastic songs.
There were quite a few times where those songs would transition her to another stage and age in her life as well. So they gave us a snapshot through those songs of what was going on and what her life looked like at a certain point in time.
Yeah, they're all from her perspective, right? This is a single perspective. She's not always singing everyone. And there is one in frame song. I think that's the when she goes with her father to see the clowns. There's a song that previews that. But otherwise, the songs are from her vantage.
It's time for question 2. What is the most prominent color in the movie? This is subjective.
Locked in?
Locked in.
Locked in.
There were a lot of reds. Sometimes they were happy reds. Sometimes they were sad reds. Sometimes they were bloody reds. So red.
I was going to also say red, but I'm going to also now throw in like a bright white, sort of just like general luminousness.
Sunset orange.
Is that like a Benjamin Moore color or Crayola?
Yeah. They hired me to write Benjamin Moore's catalog.
I have a feeling this may happen a lot this episode, but points for everybody. Any color would have worked, but yeah, the red stood out. Even blending a little bit, the maroon of her jacket when she's older, that seemed to be a prominent color. And then while I was watching the movie, I also thought, Tom, just the word sunset. Any color that's in a sunset just seemed to glow out of this movie, and I think it worked. It was only I was going to say it's only when it was in flashback, but even when we're watching show trying to figure things out, sometimes we got some of those colors. Do you guys think those colors worked in this film, or was it obnoxious?
Something about this movie to me just felt very 2001, which is the year it was made. So that, or no, that's the year it was set. So maybe not an accident, but it just had felt to me like a lot of other movies that I would consider of this era, like Baz Luhrmann movies, especially like Moulin Rouge. But also to me, it has sort of this like kind of the like drug adjacent music video vibe of like Train Spotting or Go, like some of the early Doug Lyman movies. So to me, that color felt like it was. And it's funny because we just talked so much about how it reminded everybody of these like 30s and 40s epics. But to me, it felt like there was something sort of drug tinged about it and the color to me added to that.
I'm going to throw something else in the mix. So this movie was a lot on the visuals as well as the audio musical songs, as we were saying after the first question. Something that really jumped out at me early, and whether it's this retro vibe or whatever you're talking about there, the songs and the backgrounds had almost this Disney vibe to me. So it was a really weird mix, like songbirds flying by and just the animation style on top of everything else that's going on. And then later in the movie, I believe it was Megumi who quite specifically says that she thinks that the world is like Snow White and Cinderella. And I'm like, okay, they're legit referencing Disney here. So it wasn't just me getting subtle hints of it. That actually was, it had to be an influence. So you add that to the mix of everything else you just talked about, Ryan, and your mind is just like, whoa.
Yeah, it's Disney through Danny Boyle, right?
Yeah.
It's like you drop some acid and then you watch Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And that's where my word excess came from, because I had the same thing you did, Ryan, that it reminds me of that. That what Train Spotting to a little bit Baz Luhrmann, because Baz Luhrmann also loves his films are too much, right? That's the
And just like that frenetic editing.
Yeah, exactly. As many cuts as possible. We're going to zoom in on somebody in kind of a glass bowl lens, because we can. It's clearly a set. A lot of times we're in areas that are clearly look like a set, much in the way Moulin Rouge does. And that was what the feeling was. It's not a comfortable world to be in. I'll say that. And I think that the more Disney through acid the scene is, the more uncomfortable it is. And in the last 40 minutes, so I think I enjoyed the last 40 minutes more than anything, is a lot of that felt that it was coming out of the film, that the film was getting more. The acid trip was over. It was finishing up. And what we had now was this woman alone with her garbage. And these delusions became more obviously delusional, as if we're standing outside of her experience as opposed to with her, as we had been before.
Yeah, because even when we get the boy band sequences, a lot of that hyper color goes away. And when that could have been a musical number, it didn't feel as much like a musical number when she goes to the concert, she's watching on TV. Yeah, I didn't think of that. The movie definitely sobers up by the end.
Yeah, all you're left is was with the river. The river is the last source of color.
I believe that's on purpose, though, because even in KJ's intro, I'm glad he brought up the movie Big Fish, because there's a lot to say about that. Now, the only difference between Big Fish and this movie is Big Fish, they used fantastical stories to really exaggerate mundane activities. Whereas in this movie, we use the fantastic to make the sadness more palatable. So it's a different way of framing. Things are great. And even after she gets beat, one of her many beatings which is horrible, I felt so sad for the character, she starts singing songs about, I'd rather be with him getting beat than be alone. So it has that same kind of tone, but I think that's why we get this acid trip type happiness, because we know it's all fake. It's not real. So I really enjoyed that way they portrayed that throughout this film.
Yeah, I would say I think the Big Fish comparison is good, but there is a difference between delusion and self-invention. Delusion is you have a lack of agency there when you believe you do have agency. And self-invention, which I think is what Big Fish is about. It's about, I find that I can invent my past because I can. Because I could just say what happened to me in the past. Why not? Why accept a narrative I don't like? It's about how non-delusional that is a legitimate course of living, self-invention, so creating your own narrative. In this story, our lead character doesn't have that ability,
but she does seem to just be overburdened with sort of like love to give, energy, some kind of like lust for life, and I think that like the color gives that, and yeah, just we're sort of inside her mind, and like just the energy she has for the world that just keeps rejecting her.
Yeah, I'm not proposing it's her fault. I think that's right. That it was also one of the things that frustrated me with the movie was it seems there's a bit of a kind of pop psychology makeup to her, which is, as a young girl, she was rejected by her father. And then she always sought out men who were prone to reject her. I mean, that made me kind of want to pull my hair out. But, I think once you're kind of able to forget, the kind of psychological world building that's going on, I was able to have, a lot of sympathy for her. And I think, again, I keep saying this, but that last 40 minutes really I found quite affecting for that reason.
That was the one thing I had to kind of just say, okay, I'm going to deal with that. She had that stereotypical, and there's no other way to put it, daddy issues type, situation going on. And I just took it for what it was. But what I will say is the lead actress did a very good job in her role, because I did feel bad for her character and I wanted better for her, and life was just never seeming to work out for her.
The end of round one, we're tied with 2 across the board. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back.
Last year, my wife and I visited the Amazon rainforest. We saw howler monkeys, jaguars, and a pink Amazon river dolphin. Overhead, the majesty of the macaw screamed his mating song, while the red and yellow-necked king vultures soared between man and God. The Amorphophallus titanium seemed to glow yellow in the moonlight, and the mystical bow dentel trees crowded the sky with its white flowers. Within this globe of multicolored light and stunning displays of the emergent variety that nature can produce, all I could think of was, ugh, I'm hungry. Why doesn't somebody knock all this crap down and build me a Denny's? Now that's what I would call a vacation. But sadly, there was no Denny's. That's when I started to buy Doc Olson's anti-organic food. Unlike organic food, which claims to feed their animals no antibodies or growth hormones, Doc Olson's anti-organic meats stuffs their animals with enough steroids to make their cows look like the black and white love child of Lou Ferrigno and Wonder Woman. And in addition, for every 5 pounds of testosterone-fueled meat you purchase, Doc Olson himself will burn down 1 acre of rainforest. That's right. Him and his team of firebrand mercenaries are in every major rainforest in the world, just waiting to take your lunch order and then light it up. My dream of Amazonian Denny's may be dead, but yours doesn't have to be. That's Doc Olson's anti-organic food. Eat some rage meat and light it up.
And we're back. Before I turn it over to KJ for round 2, we always ask the guest a critical question. Ryan, if you could watch this movie with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be?
Well, I gave it a lot of thought, and it's hard to believe given that I could watch this with anyone, dead or alive. But as I mentioned before, this really reminds me of 2001, which was when I was in college. And so I would like nothing more than to sit down and rewatch this with my friend, JP, who I went to college with. And he and I have lost touch since then. So JP, if you're listening, which I'm sure you are in the massive fan base, then get in touch with me and let's watch some movies virtually together.
Did you watch any other movies with JP?
This was the era of like I'm sure this is like kind of stuff he used to live in Hong Kong, so this was like just the kind of stuff that he would have turned me on to.
So Ryan, I'm trying to picture this. When you were in college, or at least when I was in college, it was still tube TVs, usually on top of a dresser that was way too high. It was in retrospect, it was kind of uncomfortable to watch movies in the dorm.
True, yeah.
Was this in the dorm that you guys were
yeah,
watching?
You'd like prop yourself up on someone's bed awkwardly. And then JP was also the type of guy like you, KJ, who had miraculously downloaded the movie. It's like there was a few people that were like DVD collectors, and like they always had the Jim Jarmusch DVD collection, and like why they owned those things when they ever bought them, I don't know. They were expensive too. But, JP was definitely like the guy who had it all downloaded somehow. And those things took up space then, so that was like another magical feature.
You could watch it and then have to delete it after.
He also turned me on to remember that viral video, All Your Base Are Belong to Us. So if you're talking about what was the movie I used to watch a lot with JP, it was the viral video, All Your Base Are Belong to Us.
All right. We're going into round 2 here. All the questions will be worth 2 points, so it's anybody's game because everybody's tied. It's time for question 3. 3 times in the film, Matsuko says she thought her life was over. Name one of those times.
Locked in.
Locked in.
Locked in.
All right, Ryan, what do you have?
After she killed that random dude she had shacked up with.
After she was confronted by the store owner and the owner or head of the school in front of the guy with the white teeth she liked about the stealing of the money.
And Nick, what do you have?
I'm still wrapping my head around Tom's answer.
It's a good description of the movie.
Yeah, my answer, I believe she did that when Ryu left jail and immediately slugged her in the face. She has flowers for this guy, and he comes up and clocks her and runs in the other direction. And now she is alone again after waiting years for this man.
All right, and points to Ryan. She does
Oh.
say that after she murders her the guy that she was living with, kind of in between other prominent boyfriends.
I believe she refers to him as like a lesser pimp or an aspiring pimp or something of that pimp style.
He's called a money man. I looked that up. I don't know what that means.
Yeah. The other times, Tom, you were real close. So the other time is towards the end of the movie. They flash back to when Ryu comes into the principal's office. She thinks he's going to confess. He says, "I didn't take the money."
Yeah, exactly. But he does that in front of the principal, the owner of the school, the store owner, and also White Teeth Guy.
Got it.
For some reason, White Teeth Guy is there. It's the only time that all of those people are in the same room.
I thought you were talking about when the principal confronts her, and then she goes outside, and the white tooth man comes out of the darkness.
No. It's when the principal, but it's not even the principal. It's like the person ahead of the principal.
Yeah. It's the superintendent, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, points go to Tom then too, because that was my confusion. And then Nick, not during that prison scene, but it's when her first-ish boyfriend commits suicide by train, and she's standing in the rain. Mm-hmm.
It was the other person who beat her for no reason.
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah, some of these scenes were really tough. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't even do a slap. They do a punch.
Yeah.
Like it's...
Which kind of makes you think about Tom's white tooth guy and that element of humor that seemed like present in the beginning that did just kind of trickle away as we kept going. As you said, the last 40 minutes had a serious mood shift, but now reflecting back on all those different elements of brightness and humor that sort of misled us where we were going.
Yeah, I think that the guy with the white pants and the white teeth, I think part of his role is, if the Ryu money incident didn't happen, I think we are to assume that she would have continued to be a teacher and possibly ended up with, perfect other teacher guy that seemed to be there.
They did go bowling. That's a pretty solid start to a relationship.
Yeah, it's also the ideal kind of situation, right? She's as doe-eyed as a person can be. She's a music teacher who's very popular, and she has this like perfect man who blushes when he asks her out, and you know what I mean. He seems invented, and a lot of it is right. When she's talking about him, she's talking to Kami, her sister.
Yeah, Kumi.
Kumi is her sister who is ill. She has a chronic illness of some sort and is bedridden for most of the picture and dies fairly young. And, we get the story of the man with the white teeth, who's so called because whenever he smiles, his teeth glisten. There's a little animation of ding, and that seems to be an invention of her telling Kumi about the perfect man.
Now, those scenes, though, aren't we watching it through her point of view? Like, his face doesn't literally turn bright red, blushy. So I think all of that is through her lens, which I think was done well.
Yeah, and these were, apart from the obvious framing of the nephew finding out the story of his aunt, these are other reasons I thought Big Fish was kind of a good a comparison, because a lot of these stories are from her perspective. So she's probably an unreliable narrator, and we're getting a slightly different version of what actually happened.
Not to go there, but do you think the beatings were more extreme in her mind than in reality? I know that's getting into touchy ground, but I just was curious if, now that we brought that up, I didn't think of it during the movie.
I think it's part of the style.
Yeah.
The movie's big, and it's part of the performance style as well. Everything everybody does is it's not a movie or a performance style that works through subtlety. Or that's just not what it is. It's about kind of surface performance. It's about largeness and um, scaling up the emotion. It's not something uh, like as an American watching movies or Westerner or whatnot, really kind of prize. We sort of tend to look for, at least I do, kind of these subtle performances in which a lot of things are under the surface but still clear. Seems to be a different performance tradition that we're working with. So even the violence is in excess, and I also think that's this director's style as well. Not just a comment on Japanese artistic style, but I think this particular director likes his violence to be pitched past acceptable, right? And for some reason, that extremity, that excess of harm, is what he likes to convey, or what he uses to convey. I mean, we KJ and I watched his previous movie. What's that called again?
World of Kaneko.
World of Kaneko, which I turned it off after about an hour and a half. It's so violent and so kind of I disgusting that. But the whole movie was about, again, that excess. Like, that movie was about people who were so despicable and so violent that I personally couldn't get through it.
He definitely accomplished that, because all those scenes were shocking and off-putting, but I'll leave it at that.
Another thing I really liked about Memories of Matsuko, which I'm kind of surprised I liked, is in a lot of scenes, they would put things that didn't seem important, but then later on would be wrapped back into the story. Right at the end of Megumi's story, we see that she meets Matsuko one more time at a hospital or something. And you don't really think about that at the time. You're just like, oh, that's interesting. But then we see the story of her getting to the hospital, and we see it from Matsuko's perspective. And I kind of like the way they folded that into itself over and over and over again. Like that, if that wasn't done well, that could have been really obnoxious. But I liked how they showed us things that were going to happen without us realizing those are something that was going to happen. And then we got to see it happen.
Yeah, the future seems to be a threat by being reframed from her nephew show's perspective. Gives her redemption. And by redemption, I don't mean that she's sinned, so she's bad, so she needs to be redeemed, but it prizes her. And so in the last 40 minutes, we see somebody who will remember her, though he has no actual memories of her, but somebody who will remember her as almost like a religious figure. Right, he contextualizes in that way. He just defines her as God, as does Ryu, her former lover, and that's what's so kind of really touching and lovely about this movie is it uses the perspective of a person who doesn't have a perspective to redeem.
I'm going to be a little argumentative just because I like the sentiment of the idea that her life was not meaningless, and so that was something that kept coming up at the beginning of the film. The father mentioned, and it's as a flashback, it's mentioned again that her life was meaningless because, for whatever reason, we would, for whatever our metrics are that would gauge that she didn't have a successful career, she didn't marry, she doesn't seem to have children. So I like the idea that her life was not meaningless, but and the last 40 minutes I just couldn't wait for it to end. I just thought it just kept going. And the last 15 minutes, I just thought it was so overwrought. I was dying. And every time it cut, I was like, it has to be over, and then it would fade back on again. I couldn't believe it. And so I appreciate the sentiment, but I was just like, enough, river. I'm done.
Was it too saccharine? It
was way too saccharine and just overwrought, too much. And then it kept going.
Yeah, it's another type of excess.
It was.
Ryan, you're not alone. I'm in your camp. It just kept going. And when I was saying how dense the movie was, that's one of the elements there at the end. I kind of was like, I get the story already. Let's kind of wrap this up. Not saying I didn't enjoy it, but I watched this over multiple sittings just because of life And honestly, I think I had to watch it over multiple sittings. Otherwise, I'm not sure if I could have gotten through the 2 hours and 10 minutes.
So I'm going to draw up a comparison to this, and there's a Brian De Palma film from the '80s starring Sean Penn and Michael J. Fox called, it's a Vietnam War movie, and I just forgot the name because we're recording, so of course I forgot the name. But it's based on a David Rabe play, and if you ever know David Rabe writes these Vietnam War plays that are pretty brutal. And in the initial ending that he had written, it was that this Vietnam vet had put these other people in prison for harming innocent Vietnamese people. And in the initial end, they come out of prison and they get him, kill him or whatever. And in this ending, that doesn't happen. It ends with this kind of cheeseball line that he has a nightmare on a subway and he wakes up and there's a woman sitting there and she goes, "Did you have a nightmare?" And he goes, "Yeah, but it's over now." And it's this complete cheeseball thing. And when people interviewed De Palma about it, he said, "Yeah, I know it's cheeseball, but I just love this character so much. I wanted to make him happy at the end." And that's what I felt in these last 4 minutes. Yes, it's too much. Yes, we're waiting for it to cut and finish. Yes, we get the point, but God, he just wants to, he wants to give somebody the memory of her so that she can live in the way she should have.
And going back to what we were saying, even Gone with the Wind can feel like that. Like, oh, it's still going. Like we're still.
Oh yeah,
Right.
I know. Gone with the Wind is forever.
Well, we really can't compare it to one of the longest films, right? Like,
Well, I'm saying it's harkening back to some of those epics that may have gone on too long. I also watched this in multiple sittings, and by the end, I felt like I had watched, I don't know, 3 or 4 movies. Right? It feels like a lot. It really does. It's time for question 4. To whom does Matsuko give her final haircut?
Locked in.
locked in.
Locked in.
All right, sounds like everybody knows it. Everybody at the same time, maybe 1, 2, 3.
Kumi?
Her sister.
Kumi, Yumi.
Yep. All right, points for
Sister.
everybody.
It's Yumi, right? Or was it Kumi?
Kumi.
No,
with a
Kumi.
Kumi.
K.
Oh, okay.
Yep, Kumi.
You know, I have a dark question about her sister. Earlier in the conversation, I think Tom said that she died young, but I got the impression somewhere in this long movie, so who knows how many years, because also this beautiful actress never ages, either in real life or in the film. Even when she's in her fat suit, she's beautiful. So it was hard to get a full sense of how much time was going by. You could gauge she had 8 years in prison, and they let out a few things. You knew she died at 53, and different things like that. But anyway, I actually was getting the impression that the sister was continuing to live for longer than expected, which was maybe not a huge point of the film, but what she did check in with family from time to time and asked of the sister. And so I got this sort of impression that too was yet another, like she had sort of made these sacrifices for her sick sister, didn't, her father encouraged her not to tell her about her dating life because that would make her sick sister sad and all these things. And yet her sister ended up to live a maybe longer life than they had expected. So even that sacrifice was not as didn't turn out as she was intending, but I could have been over-interpreting that.
We know that you actually could track if you paid attention to the timeline of the movie, because a lot of those different songs will literally say this is her in her 20s, in her 30s. There was a time where the massage parlors were out of favor and she came back home. And then later the brother says that she left when she said big sister left or something like that. So it was either in like Matsuko's 20s or 30s, then her sister died. Her younger sister died. So you're right, though. I think she was bedridden for many, many years.
Yeah, and she dies saying, what does she die saying? She's looking for her sister when she dies, right? That's her dying words.
Right. Of course, by the very end, we've made it very clear that her sister welcomes her.
Yeah. The family stuff seemed the family stuff I both liked and didn't like, just because, as I said before, the kind of psychology stuff was a little, eye roll. But if you're going to make a melodrama, having a dying sister who welcomes you to heaven at the end of the movie, why not, man? Go for it. You know what I mean? Like, if we're going to go over the top in every single way possible, have a literal stairway to heaven with your sister welcoming you.
I had that in my notes. And then also, if you noticed, when she was going a little cuckoo and gave her sister a haircut, the sister had the haircut that she had. So she welcomed her at that stage. So it was definitely the ideal vision. But again, that's through her eyes, her vision of going to heaven.
All right. After question 4, Nick has 4 points. Ryan and Tom have 6. So we're going on to a bonus question. It's time for a bonus question. How old is Matsuko when Ryu was released from prison?
I got it. Locked in.
Locked in with a guess.
Locked in.
All right, Nick, what do you have?
30.
Ryan?
Yeah, I was going to say like 33.
Tom?
I'm gonna go with 34.
Ooh, got the prices right.
Yeah,
over here.
that's the strategy.
Yeah, she is 40. So episode goes to Tom.
She's 40? Really? Oh. Okay.
Actually, yeah, he was in jail
Well
for
played.
like 8 years or something.
Mhm.
But there were elements of comedic value sprinkled in the movie. And one of them was she has to leave in a rush because the Yakuza are coming. So she packs a bag and she throws like her oranges in it. So
And they just like
hastily
spill over, like only a few
Yeah,
make
yeah.
it.
It's just like, and she's like throwing this stuff in. And then there was another scene where the nephew Sho, his girlfriend was leaving a message on the phone and he's trying to light a cigarette and the lighter's not working. And just as he's listening, there's like a fireball that almost like lights his hair on fire. Like silly little things that if you weren't paying attention.
Yeah, but what did you guys think of that murder, though? the end of that.
Wait, which murder? Oh, okay. Yeah, I was
her,
gonna say
her
which
murder, or, the one that matters.
I mean, she gets killed by kids. Like there was a certain point where I was like, oh, this is just like a Shaggy Dog story where like the ending of how she got killed doesn't matter. This is just an excuse to tell her story. But then she was killed in this kind of meaningless way. And I was like, no, the ending matters.
Yeah, I think that was the most effective violence in it. Affective with an A. Right? That really struck home, was that kind of, the meaninglessness of it, because they're kids. They don't even have developed intentions, right? So it's just sort of, you stumbled upon puberty almost. That's what ended up kind of taking you down. I mean, that was really probably more effective had more an effect on me than any other violence in the movie. And it was probably done the most tastefully. It was done at a distance. We didn't really see it.
I think that's why I thought it went long too, because that plot line that they were trying to tie up with the bow, where her life was meaningful. I enjoyed the story along the way, but I didn't really like buy into that because her life kind of happens and then it ends. And I know we're supposed to have this big epiphany, but you got to share with me, people, like what was this big epiphany where her life had meaning?
I don't think it.
That was the reason I was.
No, I was going to say that. Yeah, it seems like the meaning for the brother is respectability or kind of meaning as he can define it for himself, right? And a meaningful life for the nephew then, or maybe from the perspective of the filmmaker, is that her life ends up having meaning for these people, for Ryu, and then also for Sho, her nephew, right? They both end up seeing her as kind of they both refer to her as a god figure, right? This is the kind of thing I can believe in, and it ends up having meaning for them. So the meaningful life ends up being, I mean, it's a cliched thing, but melodrama permits that, and good melodrama permits that nicely, which is that the meaning your life has is not you to choose. It's not for you to choose, that type of thing.
My read on that, when I'm really trying to search for how this all came together, was that maybe her life was a good lesson for her nephew, because it kind of seemed when we entered the film, his place is full of trash. He was going to be a musician, and we literally see dust on the guitar when the father comes. So maybe her whole life journey would allow her nephew maybe to go down a different path. But that's me just searching. I didn't think it was as impactful as maybe this whole 2-hour story should have gotten to the meaning of why she was there. I get it, but that was the part where I thought it dragged.
Yeah, either put him on a different path or give him permission to be on a similar path.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be a little more cliched to go, well, now I mean, first of all, it doesn't make any sense for him to look at her and go, I don't want to be like that, right? Because that isolates her, that others her, that alienates her. She's the thing not to be. And to an extent, there's still a bit of othering in the sense that if you're going to refer to somebody as a kind of God I can believe in, that's somebody apart from you, right? But it's somebody who he's kind of related to, but whose memory can matter to him for the sake of the memories mattering, for the sake of here's a person who's sympathetic, who who's kind of a part of me, who I shared, genetic information with, and now I can have her memories, and they could be something that is sweet and sympathetic because she's a person deserving of sympathy. She's not the successful businessman, right? That person's probably a lot harder to sympathize with. And so he's able to give her life meaning and therefore take on that kind of, maybe a different type of responsibility, the responsibility of preserving the memory, because who else is going to?
It's time for Movie Rent.
So I mentioned at the top of the episode that for whatever reason in 2008, probably when I saw this movie, I didn't know that a movie could be a musical, could be as brutal as this movie, could be so hyper realistic, but at the same time feels pretty grounded when we're watching it through like Show, her nephew feels like a very real character. I think I had students who could have been exactly that guy. So I just didn't know all that could happen at one time in a movie. Um, is there any other movies, books, TV shows that had changed what you thought a movie, book, or TV show could be?
I'd say it's kind of a merger. I'd say uh, the works of William Gass, specifically The Tunnel or Omen Setter's Luck. He's a novel writer, and um, he is sort of bridging modernism and postmodernism. And he was very, very kind of influential on me, like how a book can be structured or how chapters can be structured. He would write, the tunnel is structured in the way Arnold Schoenberg's 12 tone system is structured. And so it's drawn from concert music in order to create the structure there. And the other one would be somebody like Finnegan's Wake from Joyce, who does the same thing, right? He not from Arnold Schoenberg's 12 tone. Joyce predates that, but Finnegan's Wake does it kind of the same time. Anyway, regardless, but experiments in kind of structure and how those things can really launch off of and away from the kind of Dickensian development and episode.
Did those lead you to any other books that you otherwise may not have
yes.
found?
Yeah. I mean, with Gass mostly writes criticism instead of fiction. He's written a decent amount of fiction, but a lot of criticism. And so his critical sources, what he's writing about, of course, but also he was part of the kind of William Gaddis club. So Gass, Gaddis, John Hawkes, who was a lovely writer as well. John Barth, if anybody knows, the floating opera, his book there, or the Sot Weed Factor is another Barth novel. And yeah, it brought me to also Gaddis's The Recognitions, which is a book from 1954 or 55. It's stunning. It's I think a top 5 American novel. And they all kind of knew each other and were friends. And it was kind of the less well-known school of American postmodernism. You could think of like Thomas Pynchon and those people as being the more, Don DeLillo being more well-known school. But I really loved the kind of Gaddis Gass thing that was going on in the corner.
Well, I can't compete with those examples. Those are some deep dives. I hope everyone was taking notes. So mine are ever so slightly more pedestrian than those. But I just thought back immediately to like high school and the movies that I would first watch to realize that movies could be, more than just like, straightforward narratives and stuff like that. And one of them that sort of embarrassingly comes to mind is if you guys remember when there was the remake of Psycho in like the late 90s, but that generated a lot of mainstream coverage for, this is before blogs and websites. And so I just was, whatever was on the radio at my parents, and, it had to really get through the mainstream to hit me as a teenager. But, people really talked about like why Psycho mattered and sort of why it was weird that it was being remade. But that made an impact on me. And I also remember watching Don't Look Now. And for some reason at the time, that's the it takes place in Rome. It's the oh my gosh, I'm blacking on Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland, and he's in Rome with his wife, and they're grieving their daughter. And for some reason, when I watched this the first time,
with the dwarf, right?
With the dwarf, right? Well, way to give it away.
Oh,
but for some reason, it was explained to me that there was no explanation for this movie, that it was just open to interpretation. And I've since rewatched it, and I also actually recently read the book that it's based on, and I feel like there's a pretty straightforward explanation. But at the time, it was like movies can be anything; they don't need to be explained, and that was pretty cool to have brought into your consciousness as someone who's just getting involved in movies and interested in movies. I want to give a quick shout out to a recent movie because I've become interested recently in Afrofuturism, and I've just been exploring different films. And this is not necessarily a on-the-nose example of Afrofuturism, depending upon your definition of it. But there's this great movie from maybe like 8 years ago or so called An Oversimplification of Her Beauty, which even if you just watch the trailer, you'll get a sense that this is a version of filmmaking you've never seen before, which is tough to say in whenever this came out, and certainly now that like how, even when we're saying Memories of Matsuko, we're saying, oh, reminded me of this, reminded me of that. So to see a movie this day and age that doesn't remind you of anything else is really cool. It still hasn't all been done, folks. There's still a lot of new things to do.
It's like 2 months ago, I watched Don't Look Now, and it was the last conference I went to before COVID. There was a panel on Afrofuturism. So
wow, you have to do that. It's one of your next topics. I can hear what you guys think.
I don't know it. I don't know. I've never read Afro. And I'm trying to remember. There's one author who works in.
I haven't read. I mean, everything I know is from the movies.
Yeah, one author I know who was working from wrote comics. That was what this person was discussing. But I don't remember the name off the top of my head now.
Well, Ryan, you don't have to worry. My example is also a little bit more recognizable. So when KJ posed this question on other media that kind of expanded our views of what that media could accomplish versus a straightforward, in this case, TV show, it is involving one of the directors we've dealt with in a recent episode on Eraserhead. But what came to mind for me was Twin Peaks, the original one, not the remake, or not remake. They added additional seasons. I don't know exactly. I haven't seen the new one. But this goes back to the 2-season 1990 to 1991 TV show. I did not see it at that time. I'm sure this was lumped into a plethora of other things I watched throughout the college years. It was probably recommended to me by either KJ, Tom, or our friend Doug, or maybe all of them, quite possibly. But this is one that showed me, and again, it's kind of a, dare I say, gateway drug to David Lynch. It's something you can start to absorb without going straight into the fantastical. But it starts off as almost a murder mystery. A detective's in town, there's been a murder, things are going on. And then quickly we get into supernatural. So you almost got like a soap opera drama in the beginning, but then it goes in a lot of different directions. Not all of them get resolved. If you're looking for pure resolution, I don't have a full vivid memory of the entire series. It's been quite some time. My recall isn't quite there, but that was one I was like, okay, there's more going on here than meets the eye.
Yeah, Twin Peaks is definitely one of those shows that makes you wonder why we don't have more shows like that just feel a little off, even though it's kind of a straightforward thing.
That fell after 2 seasons.
Yeah.
We have a lot of shows like that.
And sometimes it can be hard to recognize when things came sort of before your time, even if you were alive, but you didn't watch it then, and you've since watched other things that came after them, it can be hard. Sometimes it's a little bit boring to be told those things when people are like, oh, you like this, you would have loved this 1930s version. And you're like, I really don't want to watch the 1930s version, even if it was highly influential. But Twin Peaks is not like that. Everyone should go back and watch Twin Peaks and see its influence, how it's trickled through, because it's still wildly entertaining.
Yeah,
I also
it
think
is.
that's a tricky one. That was regular TV, correct? So that was a tricky one for general audiences. I think that might have been, especially 1990, 1991, out of mainstream comfort zone. And even when I watched it, I still think you had to view TV and film through a certain lens to truly appreciate it. So that was one that I looked back and I was like, yeah, I could see why this maybe only made 2 seasons, just because there's a lot of shows like that. Even, and this is going in a different topic, but Family Guy got cut because they kept moving it around and they couldn't gain an audience. Then the DVDs couldn't stay on the shelves. And yes, people used to buy seasons in stores and DVDs, and that's how it came back, and it's still running. So it's interesting to look at it not only in that time frame, but in the present time frame. Well, KJ, this definitely was an interesting pick. We had a lot to talk about with this one. I'd like to once again congratulate our winner of the week, which is Tom in the bonus round. Congratulations.
Yay, thank you. Yay. And the people rejoice.
Yay. Check out our website, talkingpicturestrivia.com, for more information about us and our episodes. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as our YouTube channel. We are extremely grateful for any positive reviews, as those help others like you find us. If you like what you hear, remember to like and subscribe to our show. What was the movie that changed the way you look at movies, and why? Leave a comment on our YouTube channel and let's continue the conversation. Additionally, you can follow us on Twitter at Talking Studios. Thanks again, Ryan, for joining us today. Where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Indie Arts Voice.
You can find me on Twitter at Thomas Lehman 15.
And you can find me on Twitter at KJ10001000.
Join us next time when we discuss Tom's recommendation from 1927, The Passion of Joan of Arc. Should be a fun one. Talk to you then. Ding, 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 ding.
And you can find me at Thomas Lehman 15.
And you can find me on Twitter at KJ10001000.
Should we have Tom do it? I don't know if he said Twitter, or is it self-explanatory?
Is there another at? Sir,
No, you didn't say Twitter. You just said you can find me at Thomas Lehman 15.
You can find me. Okay. You can find me on Twitter at Thomas Lehman 15.
I promise I'm not a bot. Turn your spam filter off, or else there will be no dialogue.
Well, at least now they know to look on Twitter. So find me at Thomas Lehman 15.